Day, grade 12 learners, and welcome to today's English home language lesson. My name is Vash Suchit, and we are dealing with the lessons that brought to you proudly by the Gauteng Department of Education in collaboration with the Cybono Discovery Center. And today, grade 12s, we're going to be dealing with your paper 4 orals. I'm sure you've done your prepared speech already for the first term and your listening comprehension, but we're going to be dealing today a little bit more with the prepared speech and the unprepared speech, where we're going to be getting ready to do that assessment this term and hopefully be finished with it by the end of the next 2 months and then ready for our phase of moderation of the orals that we will be conducting in the third term of the first week. Okay. So that is where we headed with this. And remember, this paper, I call it paper 4, and we know it as paper 4, is just as important as paper 1, 2, and 3. Now, if you have to think about your exams, grade 12s, you have to make sure that you have a good springboard for you to go into the written papers, okay? So this one's giving you that opportunity to do that. So excel in the oral communication. Make sure you're getting that 50 marks, to the best 50 marks that you can get, or the portion of that 50 marks. And then from there, you have a good springboard for paper 1, 2, and 3 then. All right, so we are dealing with the revision of your paper 4. Okay, so let's get into the lesson today. I will cover the following things as I mentioned already in my introduction, which is the structure of the paper 4. Then we're looking at your communication model, which you have seen before. It's just recapping that, all right? And then we're going to be looking at the purpose of the prepared speech and the unprepared speech. And then I'm going to take you through a little bit of revision on that rubric that we are using to assess you with. And then finally, we're going to look at the moderation if we have some time for that, okay? So here's the breakdown. You have to do 4 tasks in this year, which gives you a mark out of 50. Now, once you get that mark out of 50, we then put that into a percentage for the final exams. All right. And that is not double added to your final exams. Don't even think about that. It's the 12.5% that is already given to you before you write the paper 1, 2, and 3. Now, remember, June is your first, official papers that you're going to be writing in terms of preparation for the final exams. Then you got your prelim and then the final NSC, okay? So we have opportunity to now excel on the written side of things. But your opportunity of that 12.5 is only going to be valid now until the end of the second term. All right, so 12.5% is already given to you before you get to write the 3 papers. Now, when we're looking at that 12.5 grade 12s, notice I've said it is a compulsory component. So the moment you miss a speech, or you've missed the literacy comprehension, or you miss your unprepared speaking, for example, you have now, in essence, put your NSC graduation in danger. Because if you don't get a mark for orals, it means when we're dealing with the SPA, you're going to be having outstanding marks. And therefore, you run the risk of not being resulted at the end of grade 12. All right? So you are jeopardizing your entire schooling career if you do not do your SPA, yes, but also more importantly, this 12.5%, these tasks that are given to you with orals. So don't take it for granted and say, oh, you know what, it's just a speech. I'll do it whenever I want to. It is just as important as your exam paper 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so that I hope has rung some sense into your brains to know that you have to take the oral paper very seriously as well. All right. So then we have the communication model, which you have seen before, grade 12s. Now remember, when you communicate, you have an idea, you have a purpose, you have an intention behind what you're saying, and you'd like your audience to understand that. So between those two end and beginnings, at the end and the beginning, you have the message itself that you are delivering, your speech content, your unprepared speaking content. That is the message that you'd like to get to the audience. So your context of communication is very important. So when you're looking at the context, remember, this could be in the hall of the school. This could be in the classroom around your other students. It could be a on one session where you have ma'am and then a moderator and then yourself presenting. Whatever more a model of assessments being used here, you have to understand the context, all right? And that context will then dictate how you're going to deliver your speech. Then you have to also know, who are you speaking to? Now that's twofold. Are you speaking to ma'am and another panel member? Are you speaking to your students? And is your topic then relevant to grade 12 students only? Is it relevant to anyone who's listening to the speech? Are you maybe doing a speech that is going to be delivered at a chick farewell? Or are you talking about a topic that might be discussed in a U magazine at some point? The target audience, would then be coming into play here. So be aware of who you are speaking to and why are you saying what you're saying to people. There has to be a reason around that, okay? And then more importantly, remember there will be that verbal communication, in other words, the words you are using, and the non-verbal in terms of maybe hand gestures that you are using, or your facial expression, where your passion for what you're saying will come through in the way you are presenting things, okay? Things like, or aspects like pausing between sentences or phrases or clauses, whatever you're using, okay? The pausing, using that in the right, at the right places in time, okay? The pace in which you're speaking. Are you too fast for everyone to follow? Are you too slow maybe, and therefore just trying to while away, saying a few things, just to make sure you reach the time limit of the speech, okay? And then your body language. Do you have a slouched position? Do you have an upright position? Are you open gestured? Okay, that will all play a part when your audience is listening to you. Are they then going to be able to be attentive to what you're saying or not? Okay, your body language is crucial here. Good. Then grade 12, let's look at the speech. Remember, you had the opportunity to go home, use resources, and prepare your speech. So the purpose of this speech is to see, can you demonstrate via presenting your speech that you have planned the content, you have researched the content to make sure that what you put in there is actually making sense, all right? And then are you then able to present this oral in a skillful way where you're capturing the attention of your audience and you're maintaining that throughout the speech? That's important, okay? Right. Then, are we then looking for other things? Yes, we are. We're looking for the fact that, can you present this oral in a fluent manner? Are you expressive at the right points? Okay? Is it a logical flow of what you are saying throughout what you are presenting? Can you also make use of an appropriate tone? All right. Can you also maybe respond to questions that the audience may ask you? That will be tested, okay, in terms of the speech. Then I also want you to take note of, am I maybe projecting my voice in the correct way or not? All right. So be clear in the words that you are using. Your modulation in terms of your tongue in the right place, not too much of saliva in your mouth, all those things has to be taken note of, because your words could come out very slurry if you are not having that clear mouth as well, okay, where there's no excess fluid. Then your pace of how you are talking, your eye contact. Have you made eye contact? Maybe sometimes you know this content so well and you have more eye contact than actually looking at the speech cue cards. That's also fine. But then while you're doing that, make use of your gestures that are appropriate, that doesn't distract the audience from what you are saying. All right. Then your posture, I did mention to you there, make sure it is the correct posture that you're using. When I talk about then your message or the communication you are now delivering to us, it must have accurate information. Okay. So please, that would then also ensure that you confidently present what you're saying then, okay? If it's not accurate, you're going to now be not so sure about this, and then you won't be able to do justice to that particular content. Also, we are checking, are you able to also take note of maybe the biases that you as a person have? Are you looking at stereotypes that you want to challenge with the content that you're presenting? Are you able to persuade me to believe that what you're saying or what you're delivering to me at the moment is the best content ever? It's the most appropriate content that you want to give to us, okay? And if it's a speech that where you're trying to sway us to a particular viewpoint, then have you used maybe emotive language or persuasive words that could keep us engaged? Right. Then, when looking at the types of speeches that we generally are having being presented to the panels and to learners, it is usually two that feature very, very clearly. And that is your argumentative speech, firstly. And we have another one called the factual. But the first one, the argumentative speech, you know, grade 12s, how you like to argue a viewpoint. No one can challenge your views and you not be able to respond. So because you know that or you have that skill within you, we're trying to see. Now, I'm giving you a topic. Can you investigate that topic? Can you gather the information and sift through all the relevant information, okay? And from there, generate the oral for me. Are you able to also see that there might be evidence that will be presented in particular articles you read? Can you include that evidence as well in the speech to further enhance your content? Okay. And then I want to also take note, or you take note of, is the fact that can you then establish a position on the topic that you have been given and then deliver the content in that appropriate manner? All right. Also, keep it very short and simple. Don't labor a point if you don't need to. Okay, then this argumentative speech needs to be emotionally charged. In other words, you've got to make use of language or words that are appropriately used. Okay, the choice of words, that diction is very important because when you are trying to say, I believe this because of this, then you've got to use those words that says, this is why my viewpoint is justified. If you're going to say, I believe this is not true, and I got all the other words that are relevant to that, then your audience is going to receive your standpoint. Okay? So be aware of how emotionally charged the speech is, the argumentative one. Okay? Then we've got the factual one, which I spoke to you about. And you can almost say factual discursive speech. Now, the discursive speech here, again, is the formal speech, like the prepared speech, like the argumentative speech, sorry. And it also has here, grade 12s, more of a formal diction being used. A more, formal way of presenting the speech comes across as well. So the use of slang, or very much colloquial language is not really found in the factual speech or the discursive speech, as opposed to the argumentative one where you could put maybe relevant colloquial language or one or two phrases, okay, that makes sense there. So there we've got to make sure that we're very clear on the difference between the argumentative and the factual one. So the factual or discursive speech also is delivered in the third person. So you would say, for example, based on the evidence found in this particular novel or this particular research article, it is clear that this is the viewpoint that can be held. It's already indicating that it's a third person's point of view that's coming in here. All right? It's not only your view that we are looking at, like in the argumentative speech. So express your arguments and the opinions very clearly in this one. Okay? Remember, discursive, we're giving both the for and the against argument. Okay? So there also, you got to have reliable resources being looked at. You got to also take note that the information must be unbiased. You can't sway to one particular view like you would do with the argumentative one. Okay, so grade 12s, essentially I'm saying to you to please make sure that when you're presenting both sides of the argument with the discursive one, that you do it very clearly and concisely. Also remember, you got to do a lot of research with the discursive one because you're giving both sides of the argument. Whereas with the Argumentative one, you're giving us only the one, either the for or the against viewpoint. Right. So um, holistic viewpoints must be given on the topic when looking at the discursive speech. Right. Further on to that, we've got a little bit more information about the types of speeches that I want to go through, but I'll come down to that a little bit later in the lesson. So, when you are given your instruction page from your teacher on what you need to do with the prepared speech, now the question is, what is your role going forward? And it's very, very important that you know your role well and that you actually then function effectively in that role. So, when you've received the topic, you've done your research and stuff, you're now going to start writing down the content. So, we talk about the pre-writing phase, which is the process of where I take all of my ideas, I bring them together on paper. Okay, it's clear to you what you want to say once you put it down on paper. Okay, because while you're talking, you could very much forget what you want to say. So on paper and with paper and pen, you're able to do justice with that. So in the pre-writing phase, you got all your ideas there, and you're trying to then make sense of which is relevant or not. While you're doing that as well, your research is all in front of you, and now you're pulling out the relevant parts from the research. Now, you could have used the internet to source out information. You could have also then maybe used research books, textbooks, all of those things. But again, grade 12s, we're saying here, make sure it's relevant and that you've used it correctly. Okay, referencing, very important. The worst case scenario is finding yourself having to say, I use this information, and you have to explain why you used it, and maybe you didn't reference correctly, and that kind of thing. All right. So you need to ensure that you've done that. Okay. Then remember, when you are researching on the internet, you're going to put in appropriate keywords to pull out relevant information. All right. And that will then take this vast knowledge and bring it down to a more narrowed viewpoint of what you want to say. Okay, good. So use 3 or 4 words that will direct your research on the internet. Okay, even that will help you with your books when you're using it for the books research. Because remember, there you're not going to take a textbook or a research article that is published in a big manual, and now you're trying to find out where you can get information on the index page. So you need to have appropriate words that you're going to look for when you're doing that. All right. Please also don't believe everything you find on the search engine or the internet. Remember, you got to back up the facts that you are pulling out from these research informations. Okay. So make sure you're doing that. So further on to that, please, unless you are given a topic from your teacher and you are then going to go and write the speech, then that's a different setup altogether. You have the opportunity where you are going to choose a topic of your own or on your own discretion, okay? And please, when you're choosing those topics, make sure it is appropriate to the age category that you're speaking to. Now, if you're looking at, for example, presenting to a grade 12 batch, then it means that the grade 12 batch is in that age frame of anything between 17 to 19, sometimes even older, okay? But we can't expect to be talking to maybe content that is relevant to a 30-year-old in grade 12. Okay, it's not where we're going to be looking at. So again, age appropriate and relevant to the audience that we're speaking to. The topic will also then be something that must be of interest to the group of people that you are speaking to. All right, please research, but do not copy word for word, please. It lands you in hot water, grade 12s, and it really, you do not want to be in that situation because it can be very uncomfortable. All right. Select the facts that you're going to find interesting in this particular content, and then don't bore your audience. Okay, choose appropriate ones that could, maybe at some point make them smile or laugh about the content. Again, if it's appropriate. Also, the phrases that the clauses that you're using, make sure they do bring a little bit of humor to topics that you are speaking about. All right. Plan and organize this particular speech. Please remember the pre-writing phase. You've got the brainstorming, your mind map with your 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 ideas, streamlining that down or streamlining it down to at least 3 or 4 relevant points. And then while you are doing that, try and look at how you would construct your maybe your visual, okay, your visual where you have maybe a chart paper and you're starting to put down images on that, or sketching diagrams, for example, to make reference to with in your speech. Or you might decide to go the audio way where you would maybe try to record a few things that you want to say, or a clip from the internet, or you might even be involved in maybe an activity where you could have then taken a video out of yourself in that activity relevant to the speech that you are delivering. Okay, and that can be used then to enhance the content of the speech. Right. Remember, please, like anything that you're doing with writing as well, there has to be an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. So with the speech, remember it's 10 marks, okay? So a lot of content is not going to always be necessary. So you're going to have to at least look at your normal 3 paragraphs, okay? The introduction, conclusion, that is definitely there already 2 paragraphs. Maybe in between you might have another 2 paragraphs. That is your body of your speech. So that is what you must be looking at or having at the back of your mind. Okay? Then, when we're looking at the brainstorming part, please, grade 12s, make use of a checklist. When you're looking at the argumentative speech that you might have thought to use in this particular setup, ask yourself, what do I know about the speech or the subject content of the speech? Okay? Am I then able to go through my emotions in connection with that content? So ask yourself, how do I feel about this topic? Or how do I feel about the information that I've delivered? Do I have a positive outlook or a negative outlook to this topic? Okay. Then also, why or do I have this attitude or this viewpoint about the particular topic? That's relevant because then it will also help with your confidence level when delivering the speech. All right. And then when you're looking at the discursive or the factual speech, remember there we want to see certain information I've covered already. But you're going to ask yourself, what is it that I want my audience to know about this content or to learn about this topic? Okay. Have I then been able to spark their interest? Because maybe when a particular topic is spoken about, the group might have a set idea about that. And now, when you bring in an alternative view where it's maybe against that knowledge, you now are going to see that you might spark the interest of the audience, all right? And that is what we'd like to see with the discursive essay, discursive speech, all right? Can you do that? And it's all going to be obviously assessed on the rubric, okay? So here's the 3 paragraphs I spoke to you about in terms of the speech. The introduction, grade 12, has to be catchy. The information there should have maybe a line or two or a sentence or two that immediately draws the attention of the audience. Maybe present an unusual fact or give them a stat that might bring their attention there immediately. Now, obviously, if you are delivering this speech in a very serious setup, then the joke has to be appropriate or that unusual statement has to be appropriate. You can't be making a huge, really funny, joke, appropriate fact or stat or even a joke to mention in introduction. Right. Then with the body, I said to look at least 3 or 4 points in your speech. Okay, that will then be paragraph 2, 3, and 4. So your 3 points, 1 paragraph each for that each point. Okay, and there, please also look at personal views that you might have with that in that content. Okay, in that paragraph, break it down, justify it, say why it's like that. also maybe include facts or experiences of other people that may have gone through the similar information that you are presenting. Then once you've gotten to the end of your third viewpoint that you are presenting, you're then going to move to the conclusion. All right. And with the conclusion, I'm saying to you now, summarize everything between the introduction and the conclusion and include that in the conclusion. So there, once you've done that, you now become decisive in the view that you're holding. And you end that 3 paragraphs stating this is why this viewpoint is held on the particular topic. All right, so this is the role of you as a learner when you are presenting the prepared speech. All right, then now on the instruction page that your teacher has given you, please take note of that instruction page, because that's the guide that your teacher is giving you to say, this is what I expect of you within this time frame. And then I am going to be assessing you with the assessment tool, which will then be the rubric. All right. So the teacher will say, you are expected to prepare a prepared speech on a chosen topic of your choice, or they might give you 5 possible topics and then say the 6th one would be to choose your own topic, okay, just to help you if you're struggling to get a topic. But essentially it is a prepared speech that you would be able to go back and look for content that's relevant. So it says there, for example, the speech should be between 3 to 5 minutes. That is usually, grade 12s, a page to a page and a half, right? More or less, that is the space we're looking at for your content. If it goes over that, then you must also be aware, if I present a speech that's 2 or 3 pages, am I going to be able to present that in one, I'll say 3 to 4 minutes? I'm not sure if you would be able to do justice with that, because you'd be speaking at a different pace or a faster pace there, okay? So be aware of that as well. Then, on completion, you then need to ensure that you edit the written speech. So that 1 to 1.5 pages of that content, edit that. All right? And once you're doing that, make sure of the following. Is my speech cohesive? In other words, there's a logical flow from the introduction to the 3 paragraphs of the body to the conclusion. All right? That is the cohesion we're looking for. One viewpoint lends itself to another and another and another. Is the content that I've covered in the speech relevant to the topic that I have chosen? That's important. And then thirdly, can I ensure that I have a huge or a varied range of vocabulary in this? And then, is my content then of a good range of sincerity and maturity that is coming in? The statements I've used, have I expressed it in the appropriate manner? And then lastly, please avoid using more than 2 stats in your speech, because then the overusage of the stats becomes a problem. Okay. And then remember, it's a formal presentation, which means the relevant words, the relevant paces of the speech needs to be taken note of. All right. Then also remember, the cue cards are there for you as a reference point. Please make sure that you don't write your entire speech on the 5 or 6 cue cards that you have, because then you'd be reading the speech off the cue cards, and that's not what we want you to do, okay? So a reasonable size for the cue cards and only key points on the cue card. And then the last point on the prepared speech, remember, practice, practice, practice. And why I say it 3 times here is to emphasize the fact that if you do not practice adequately, you will not be able to do justice to the content. So stand in front of the mirror. Look at how you look in front of the mirror. All right. And then when you're speaking, also look up towards at the mirror and see how maybe your face looks when you're presenting. Is your eyes maybe wide open or slightly closed. All those things you can take note of when you are practicing. Look at your facial expression. Look at the body gestures you are using. All of that will be relevant to look at. Okay, cool. Then remember to talk around the keywords that you have on your cue cards. These are meant to trigger maybe 1 or 2 points from your memory that you had to include in your speech when you are presenting. And then remember, please, you are in control of the speech. No one else knows your content except you. So you become like the specialist in that situation, all right? And therefore, if you make a mistake, you are more than welcome to stop there and go to the next point from there. Don't stop and say, oh, sorry, I made a mistake, and then your audience knows you made a mistake now. You just stop, pause, breathe in, and you continue with the next point. Okay, so those are things that you need to take note of when presenting and also researching and preparing for your prepared speech. All right, also, please, some important things, right? Always select a topic that you can relate to. If you cannot relate to it, then you will not do justice, okay? Prepare that outline very clearly of your ideas or your notes that you want to include in the speech. Write down your introduction. Write down the body, the 3 paragraphs that I spoke to you, with each point being highlighted there, okay? And then finally, write down your conclusion. And then once you've done that, put in the finishing touches. That could be the part where you're going to add in your audio or your visual to your presentation. And then obviously make sure you practice, practice, and practice. All right. So let's look at the prepared speech rubric. Okay. Now, if you're looking at it, grade 12s, here it is on your screen. You've got research skills as the first descriptor we're going to be looking at. Right, I'm going to take a 1 minute break quickly, and I'm going to come back to you in a moment to continue with this lesson. All right, welcome back, grade 12s. We're dealing with the prepared speech. I've covered what you need to do with the prepared speech already, and now we're going to unpack that rubric, okay? Please remember to go through the rubric before you start preparing for the speech, okay? And hopefully, ma'am or sir does the lesson where they tell you these are the things that I'm going to be looking at when I'm assessing the speech. But if it's not done, you still go back and read what needs to be done. But understand, please, that we're working within the range of 10 marks for each of the descriptors, okay? So if you are looking at, let's say now in this case, the research skills, what we're saying then, grade 12s, is that within that category of research skills, I want to see, was the candidate able to go back home, look for relevant information? When they used the relevant information, did they have resources or sources that were used? Okay. And if there was too little of that, then already I'm going to be looking at this point of giving you a mark between 0 to 2 for your research skills. I'm then saying, your new ideas. Have you included new ideas? So remember, when the topic is there, you have generally information that people know already. Okay. But now we want to say, based on what they should be knowing, have you brought in more creative ways of looking at those viewpoints? Have you now maybe included innovative points to break that or break away from that kind of idea? Okay. And then, has the research that you've done, is it making your presentation more effective to the purpose of what you want to say? So the moment you've got that, grade 12s, we start moving up this way. Okay, so we're going to move this way. Now, if you've used maybe, let's say, one resource before, now we're getting a bit concerned here. Let's start using a little bit more, maybe 2 or 3 resources. Now, when I have those 3 resources, have I taken enough information from that resource? Okay. Don't just say, I've taken 1 point here, 1 point there, 1 point there, and therefore it's justified. No, there would at least be 2 or 3 points from each of those resources that you have, which then shows us that you have made use of a satisfactory amount of evidence from other supporting documents to what you say. All right. Then you've also included some new and interesting facts. So here already we're sitting at a mark of about 5 out of 10 for this descriptor. Okay. Thereafter, I'm going to look at, now I don't want 5. I don't want to accept 50%. I'd like to get 70 to 80 to 90% on this category. And then what am I expected to do? I'm expected to do the following. I've looked at my 3 resources. I've taken at least 3 viewpoints from each of them. So it's 3, 6, 9 viewpoints I have. And I've added in then my idea to that as well. Right. And therefore, I have looked at a wide range of resources. Then from there, by putting in my own information, I've made it a little bit more creative or interesting because I've brought in my understanding to that particular content. And therefore, I've made it a little bit more interesting than the mundane way of doing stuff. And then when I've done that, I'm now more confident because I've got my information and the established information, and I'm working with that. Do you get that? Hopefully you do. And therefore, I will be sitting anywhere between 6 to 10 out of 10 on that category. Okay, taking note of all of those descriptors. So that's where those 10 marks can come for the research skills. Then, when I'm looking at the planning and the organization of my content. Okay, so remember, introduction, body, conclusion. Now, with my body, I said 3 to 4 points that you're going to talk about. Now, if you have not, I'm not even going to go to these categories here. I'm taking them out because I expect you to now move away from that, okay? But if you're the candidate who's struggling, then yes, that might be relevant to you. But I'd like to say, even though you're struggling grade 12s, you can definitely get at least 5 out of 10, okay, for this planning and organization of content. What do I mean? I'm saying I took the instruction page that ma'am gave me. I then from there worked to see that I know my audience, I know the context in which I'm speaking. I know that I have to have a particular format, which is my 3 paragraphs and my introduction and conclusion. I'm then also very aware that I have taken about 3 resources, or even 2 is fine, but 3 would be generally the accepted one, okay? And then I've included an introduction that is catching the attention of the person that I'm speaking to. I've got an interesting fact. I've got maybe a stat in there or a particular joke that will bring their attention to me immediately. And then in my 3 paragraphs of my content, I've put down my 3 points and I've built a good body of evidence to each of the topic sentence I'm speaking about in those 3 paragraphs, okay? And then because I brought in my own ideas also in relation to those 3 points, I am now making sure that I brought in some original information as well. Okay? And therefore, if I'm going to do that and I do it well, I can already move to this point of here where I've got originality and some good insight as well to that because I've understood the resource I've used and I've put in my own understanding as well with that. And now I have a good substantial product to deliver. Right. So then if I am very aware of my audience and I've spoken to that audience with a good body of language, appropriate language, I've used the emotive word if I need to, I've used persuasive words if I need to, I've made it an emotionally charged speech if I have to, all relevant again to the topic that I have chosen. There has to be the connection between the topic and the content that I am delivering. Right. So once I've done that, I'm going towards the substantial part. And once you're in the substantial range, you can definitely move upwards to the outstanding or the merit one. Okay. So I'd like you to look at the outstanding one because the difference between 7, 8, and 9 is very little grade 12. Okay. So what we are saying to you here is that you need to ensure that you have thoroughly planned. So you've taken note of audience. You've taken note that the topic is linked to the content. Okay. You've taken note that you have the intro, the body, the conclusion. Right? Very relevant stuff. And that you've developed the idea from paragraph 2 to paragraph 3 to paragraph 4 with evidence that justifies that particular viewpoint. And then when you are justifying it, you're bringing in your own viewpoint that is in relation to that justification. And therefore, the originality comes into play there. Right. And then when you're presenting the content, you are reading. If at some points you're referring and you're reading maybe a line or two from the speech, then even that particular thing is very much having a skillful way of doing it. Maintaining the eye contact with somebody when you're saying those two sentences or whatever it is, and that you are then having a skillful conclusion included. So remember, conclusion, summarizing the 3 or 4 points that you've mentioned in the content, linking the introduction to that content, and concisely ending your speech. Right. And that would then give you also an opportunity to maximize the part of planning and organization of the content. So that's 2 parts that we have now looked at with the speech. Right. Then, oopsie, what happened here? Some language. Okay, and then the tone, speaking, and presentation skills. Again, there, remember, we are saying, have you again been able to present? And I'm again looking only here from the substantial point of view, right? Are you presenting your speech in a fluent way? Are you able to then remember in your head that you wrote in a particular style? You wrote where you said, this is my audience and it must be relevant, the content must be relevant to those audience members. Okay, so you have it at the back of your mind and you're working with that. You also are very much audible. So yes, there will be the fluctuation of where you would talk at a slower pace and then you'd go to a faster pace of way of presenting things. That would come in there. Then you might be in a soft tone of putting your point across, and then you would probably go to a louder way of speaking. Again, that is also covered here with regards to your eye contact and the facial expression I spoke to you about. And then can you ensure that you're maintaining the interest of the audience throughout? And that would then be where we're dealing with the tone, speaking, and presentation skills. Right. And then there we go there with regards to your critical use of language, okay? Remember grade 12s, we want to make sure that the language we're using is very appropriate to the age and the level of understanding of the audience. We want to make sure that the vocabulary is appropriate, okay? We don't want to use too big words where they won't understand, and we also don't want to use language that you would use in grade 5 and 6, okay? So maturity must come through with the words you're using, right? Then, are you able to manipulate the language very much in your speech, making the audience believe that what you're saying is appropriate? And then, are you then able to also be respectful of other people's viewpoints when you are presenting your speech? Right. So be sensitive to the other biases in the audience that may be presented. And when you present your information, don't always, or don't basically make them feel um, in, incapable of understanding what you are saying. Right. Then, important part of this is also your choice of your audio or visual. Remember, please, you are not in grade 8 or 9. So we are expecting that by grade 12 level, you would understood that I can be a very good speaker, yes, but I must show that I can incorporate other things to enhance my content. So the other things I'm referring to is maybe that audio clip that you might have, or that maybe you were speaking about music and you now had lyrics that you developed and you sang those lyrics. You can record that as part of your audio, all right? Or maybe you had a thought that a relevant piece of music from another artist is there that you want to use. You can make a little snippet of that and incorporate it into your speech as well. Then, if you don't have access to those facilities, grade 12s, you definitely would have access to paper, all right? And you can ask ma'am or sir if you need to as well. Can I please have an A4 paper? And you can construct an audio, a visual there for us if you need to, okay? If you need, if you that candidate who can make use of your Microsoft um, um, applications like your PowerPoint presentations, for example, you can also do that for your speech. All right. So you can make sure that you're enhancing the content by using either the audio or the visual aspects. Okay. So also when using these things, please make sure that they just don't stand there as if it's just a placard or it's just a poster. You got to make reference. So let's say, for example, I had a piece of information on my right hand side, okay? Then I would be pointing to that relevant portions, for example, okay? Or you could be a very innovative presenter, and while you are presenting your speech and your page is blank on the board or the board is blank, you now speak to the audience, deliver your content, and then take the chalk and start drawing something or writing about it and making reference to it while you are presenting. But in that instance, remember, you don't want to also put your back against the audience. They need to obviously see you. So if you're going to do that, you're going to say, okay, hold on, we're going to go to the board. I'm going to present, I'm going to draw this particular diagram, and then you show them that we're turning to the front again to present to them. Okay. And then obviously using your hands appropriately when you are presenting. And again, it will then be a 10-mark split between that. And then you would notice that we then get a mark of 50 for the prepared speech, and we bring it down to then 10 as a final mark out of 10 for this speech. Right, and that is the rubric grade 12s discussed for you. Then we also have the other part, which is topics that can come from maybe a statement or a quote that somebody of somebody's spoken words that might be on the internet, okay? And that can sometimes spur you on to present different content from what other candidates will be presenting. So, for example, let's say you took this particular quote: the life given us by nature is short, but the memory of a life well spent is eternal. Now, that is a thought provoking quote. And you can take that quote and break it up to then say, my one part of my speech will be dealing with life, for example, and the fact that having a life is a blessing, whether we feel it or not. Then, by nature, is short, meaning that there is a certain amount of days, years, if not months sometimes, that we are given to live. So it's short in the big scheme of things. All right, we don't get people who are living to 300 years, for example, okay? That's not where we are at the moment. So we have a limited amount of time on earth and it's short, okay? But the memory of life and the experiences we have during life is what becomes eternal, meaning that it's never ending thereafter, because you can always go back and look, or people who may have passed on, or people who are no longer in your company anymore, you can always go back and remember the moments that you spent with that person over the years. Okay, so that is something that you can take note of. So breaking up a quote can put you or bring you already three or four different points that you can speak about. Okay, that's just one example. The other one is a good idea becomes a great idea when you let it out. So, for example, it's saying there that in your head you think about something and it seems all wonderful in your head. However, it becomes brilliant when you take it out of your mindset, put it onto paper, and then include maybe other people's viewpoints on that. Now, I'm not saying to you, give the plan out. No, there's certain things you hold in to inside yourself. But you kind of, use leading questions, for example, to get his viewpoint or her viewpoint on this particular thing. And then you amalgamate that to give your idea the brilliance it deserves. Okay, so that's the kind of thing you can do when trying to break down that particular quote. Good. So some sample topics there for you. So when we're looking at after the presentation is done and you have an external panel that will now come and moderate certain candidates, you could have two teachers in front of you. One would be the examiner and the other one would be the moderator who's listening to the speech, okay? So the moderator is going to expect certain things from you. He or she wants to see, have you shown evidence of the planning and research, as I mentioned to you, and have you made that relevant to your life's experiences? Have you also been able to organize the material coherently? You're choosing main ideas that are relevant, and you are then putting in details of examples to support that. Did you also make sure that you had a relevant introduction, a conclusion, and relevant information between those two paragraphs? Have you demonstrated the skills of listening to and delivery of fluent and expressive oral presentations? So maybe you have listened to other people's viewpoints and you've now included that in your presentation. And if you've done that, have you expressed it in an appropriate way? Right. Further on to that, he or she wants to see, have you been able to use rhetorical devices such as rhetorical questions? Have you been pausing at relevant places in the speech? And have you avoided the aspect of repetition? Have you made certain points more emphasized in particular setups? We want to look at that. Your pitch of voice, okay? Was it appropriate there? Have you made eye contact sufficiently while delivering your speech? And can you respond to questions based on your presentation? So that's all about the prepared speech, grade 12s, and hopefully you go back and familiarize yourself with these things before you present the next prepared speech. Okay. Then within this term as well, you will present the unprepared speech. Now, if you're looking at the time frame, it's very short. You only have 4 days this week, then another 4 days next week, and then it's already the end of April. Then in May, you might have only about another 14 days because you start exams officially around the 26th of May. All right, so there's not much time to get these things done as well as covering content. So you work out how many school days you have from now until the 25th of May. Okay, cutoff date for everything to be sort of more or less done before you start with your June examinations. And remember, with languages, we do write your paper 3 beforehand. Okay, so you're already going to be starting with exams pretty soon. Now, we have the other part of the oral, which is the unprepared speech. Now, the unprepared speech also has a purpose like the prepared speech. It's varied in the sense that grade 12s, when you were given a topic or you had to choose your own topic, you had the opportunity to spend anything between a term or 2 weeks, if not more than that, to prepare the speech. All right? With the unprepared speech, you don't have that time or the luxury of that time to go and research your topic. So you will be given a topic like now, and within a couple of minutes, you have to present that particular speech. All right. So in that setup, we want to see, can you present a speech to us to demonstrate your ability in the following manner? Can you speak on any given topic? Are you able to then include your point of view on that particular content or topic? And then can you make use of relevant information to relate it to that topic? Okay, so you don't have the luxury of taking out your cell phone and researching and all of that. So you can already imagine that the topic given to you will be based on issues that are relevant to your sphere of things. Okay, so anything between what's happening in the current grade 12 year, maybe current events that are happening that will affect the decisions you make going forward, maybe events on the social media taking place that would affect you as a person in the next 2 or 3 years, or maybe there could be content you are covering in your literature that the teacher might want to speak to you about in the unprepared speech. So all of these things are topics or aspects we can look at when looking at topics for unprepared speaking. So can you take relevant information that you've experienced over the time thus far and include it with your speech? Okay. While doing that, can you apply the use of um, good sentences? Okay, varied sentences from your simple, compound to complex sentences. Can you include statements that are relevant? Can you include the rhetorical question, for example? All right. If you're using maybe something like an oxymoron or onomatopoeia, all those things, can you make use of that with the unprepared speaking? All right. So your conventions, can they be used in the relevant content? Good. So further on to that, we want to take note of the following, that it is very much daunting. Yes, it's not an easy experience to present an unprepared speech, but nevertheless, we got to see that once you get out into the real world, can you express your viewpoints clearly, concisely, effectively, for example, and obviously efficiently, meaning that within a time frame you can get us to that endpoint of what you want to say. Right, so usually this has a 2-minute allocation of time for the presentation, and we can go anything sometimes about 5 to 10 minutes. But I'm saying to you, you might have that in total 10 minutes, but 2 minutes is what the presentation is all about, and the rest could then be for your planning. All right, so that's important. The rubric again will guide the assessor and the moderator on what they're looking for, and they will again hopefully take you through that prior to the presentation being done. So within that, we're looking again, also like the previous rubric, we're looking at 3 important aspects: content, presentation, and critical use of language. All right, so those are 3 areas that you must master when we're looking at how you're going to present your unprepared speech. So with this, again, you would have to maybe choose a topic from the hat, and now you go and take that particular topic, you sit down, and you undergo the brainstorming part of this. So while brainstorming, you're going to ask yourself a few questions. You're going to say, what do I know about this subject or this topic? Okay. Have I maybe had experiences of these of aspects that are relevant to this? And then how do I feel about that particular topic that was given to me? Again, why do I have this particular feeling or attitude about it? And this is the most important point when looking at the unprepared speech. Now, this one, grade 12s, is a little more less formal than the prepared speech. So your content with your contact with your audience is essential. It is absolutely important. Look at them. Smile at them here and there when you are presenting the speech. All right, if it's appropriate to the topic you are discussing, but definitely it will be appropriate. Look at how you're going to use your hand gesture. Maybe you want to walk around from side to side in the classroom, or you want to move back and forth in the classroom or in the hall that you're presenting in. Any of those things, you will look at your surroundings and you will employ that use of it appropriately. Look at your facial expressions as what you're going to be using as well here. If you're smiling, give them a full smile. If you're having a downcast eyes, then make it very sure that in that point your eyes are downcast, but immediately after that you then lift your eyes up and look at them dead straight to maintain eye contact, okay? Because that will show them how you feel about the topic you are talking about. Please, also when you get the topic, remember you have to decide how you are going to interpret that topic. So, for example, the topic could be about, let's say, um, that maybe a bottle. Okay. Now, a bottle, in your view, could be anything that is maybe having an overflow of abundance with the fluid there that could be used in that context. All right. Maybe there could be an empty bottle and you're going to fill it in with information. There could be a point of where you take it a little bit further and you say, okay, now imagine that you come into life and there's a certain amount of viewpoints or thoughts that are in your mind or in that bottle at the beginning. Thereafter, you adding on more ideas, more information, more experiences into what you already have in existence. All right. And therefore, it starts to expand in that container. And thereafter, once you have had so many of the similar experiences or varied experiences as well, you then may gain success or failure in certain instances. And therefore, if it's a lot of success, it will overflow like water out of a bottle that's filled to its capacity and can't take any more. What will happen? The water will overflow, okay? In the same instance, the blessings or the successes may overflow from the bottle, and therefore you'd need to maybe get a larger bottle to be used, okay? Those are the kind of ideas that you need to incorporate. Obviously, they're not the bottle itself, physical bottle, but I'm meaning that maybe it's representing your life, or it's representing, let's say, for example, it's representing um, the years of schooling. All right. You progressed from grade 1 all the way to grade 12. And therefore, by grade 12, you might have been 18 years old at the time. And now there's so many ideas, so many wants, so many needs that you want to achieve in life. And therefore, it's overflowing. Your space of existence has now expanded. That's the idea you can take, okay? Or you can look at it maybe that you went to a shop and you bought a goldfish, and so you were able to take the very small goldfish and put it into the bottle and put in some water. And then when you got home, you realized that, hold on, I need to take out this goldfish and put it into a bigger container. But maybe now it's more difficult to take out the fish from that bottle because the particular circumference might be too small. So now you take the scissors, you cut over, open that bottle, and there's a little bit more space for you to now work with. That's the kind of ideas you would present, okay? Or look at even in life. So you can maybe think about it metaphorically, where you're saying that, okay, I was in grade 8 or grade 9, I had these experiences and I then grew from that. Now you are making that idea of your life a little bit more broader. Or you could say, I used to weigh 32, now I weigh 34, so my body structure has changed as well. I've got a bigger space to work in. All right? Those are the kind of ideas that you can start looking at when looking at life, for example. So decide how you will interpret the topic that's given to you. Jot down your relevant ideas. Again, like the prepared speech, remember, 3 points are usually very, very appropriate, okay? If you're going less than 3 points, grade 12s, you're not going to be able to get a lot of content to cover. So that is why I say 3 points, if not 4 points, furthermore, would be even better, where you can cover and have a fully rounded of speech to deliver. Okay? So jot the ideas that come down to your mind on the preparation paper that you have, include those points and that you want to explore in your speech, and then remember, if you can at the time while preparing in those over those 3 points, put in evidence that you might want to expand on while you're speaking, then that's going to indicate to you, okay, for this particular viewpoint, I have this evidence I'm going to speak about, and then you can expand on that while speaking. All right. Again, you don't have the luxury of writing word for word during your planning phase here because it's a limited amount of time. So back up the points that you're going to be talking about with evidence, draw on your own experience as far as possible, and obviously include information that the audience may already have about this topic. All right. Remember, catchy introduction, striking conclusion, where we have a strong concluding statement included, and then obviously number your points that you're going to talk about in a logical sequence so that you know where you're going to start and finish at the end of the day. Right. So here is the unprepared rubric, speech rubric. Okay. Now again, notice it's out of 10 marks and it's going to be the same like the prepared speech. However, there's certain aspects that we will take out of this rubric or has been taken out of this rubric because it's not the same context of prepared speaking. So when we're looking at this, let's again work with code 4, which is the adequate range. I'm saying, are you able to look or point down or write down 4 or 3 points that are appropriate to the topic that's given to you? All right, so relevant information included, 3 or 4 points, relevant information. But you cannot always organize it. So there we're saying, if you couldn't make sure that point 1 leads to point 2 to point 3, then already it's showing us that you were not so confident with this. But if you took the time again while planning to say, this is paragraph 1 or statement number 1, I'm going to justify it like this. Statement number 2, I'm going to justify it like this. Statement number 3, I'm going to justify it like this. And I'm going to start from point 1 and move to point 2 and move to then point 3. Or maybe 1 to 3 to 2. Whatever it is, have you been able to then relevantly make sure it's appropriate there? All right. So you are then going to look at maybe then moving from 6 upwards. If you've taken the relevant information, you've organized it correctly, and you have made sure that the lapses information, in other words, not everything might be appropriate, yes, but if it's too much of inappropriate information, then obviously we're going to be sticking anything from 5 downwards to 0. But if it is relevant and there's slight lapses, we would move up already to 6 or 7 out of 10 there. Right, and then, am I able to speak without lapses? In other words, I'm confident in how I'm presenting my speech and I've used relevant content, then I would move anything between 8 to 10. Then the second part is the presentation, my tone, my body language, my correct audience contact, all of that. I'm saying, have I been using the appropriate tone of voice while presenting? Is my communication with the audience or the teacher maintained moderately? So, in other words, while I'm speaking to them, am I remaining with my eye contact all the time with them? Am I including them in my viewpoints to say, maybe ma'am would have this kind of viewpoint? And therefore, if I take her viewpoint and add it to mine, I'm incorporating her into my discussion. And therefore, I would move between 6 upwards, okay, to 7. Then also my appropriate language being used. Again, remember you were a grade 12 learner. You should have had a bank of words that you have accumulated over the years that would include homonyms, antonyms, synonyms. All right. Those kind of aspects will be where the conventions of language is looked at, and we're going to say, can you then use appropriate synonyms for what you want to say? Appropriate antonyms, appropriate um, homophones being used if needs be. Okay, so those are the things we need to look at there. Right, and then with the with we looking at, sorry, when looking at language, that's what I was talking about there. Manipulate your language effectively. All right, if it's again taking the situation where you're presenting your viewpoint and you're saying that this is my viewpoint based on 1, 2, 3, have you used persuasive language there, for example? Is it having a certain amount of emotion attached to the words that you are using as well? All right. So here, grade 12s, remember, we're not going to be as strict as we would be with the prepared speech. But nevertheless, we want to gauge that you are able to deliver content appropriately to an audience. Okay. And then obviously here, we're going up with the 10 mark, 10 mark, 10 mark split. And eventually we're going to bring the mark down to a mark out of 15 for the unprepared speaking. Okay, so we have 10 mark listening, 10 mark, 15 mark listening, 10 mark prepared speech, 10 mark prepared speech, 15 mark unprepared speaking. Right, and that gives us the marks now, obviously, of 50. Right. There's one more missing, hey? I've missed out there. So there must be your listening, your 2 speeches, and then your, what you call it? Your unprepared speaking. Right, so 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. Altogether would be the marks that you would get there. Right, so the assessment process on the unprepared speech, you'll be given the topic by the evaluator, or in this case, the examiner, right? They will give you 3 to 5 minutes as a time allocation for you to prepare your response. During that time, remember, you don't have access to any other resource except your pen, your paper, and that's it. So we are saying you are drawing on your prior knowledge when you're presenting your response. The response is between 2 to 3 minutes. So again, an appropriate introduction, an appropriate conclusion, and at least 2 paragraphs in between those 2 paragraphs of the introduction and conclusion that is relevant to what we want to say. All right. Then, once the speech is delivered, what's going to happen is ma'am or sir will take that particular notes away from you. They will take the rubric, attach the rubric to those notes, and that is filed as evidence for your unprepared speaking, which goes into your body of evidence for the SPAs. All right. So, when we're doing this particular speech, the unprepared speaking, we need to know that we are checking on the evidence that you're presenting to us. Have you planned and organized the content appropriately, using the appropriate tone, the appropriate speaking skills, and presentation skills that are needed as well? Did you show that you can use language appropriately, good vocabulary, good choice of words? All of that needs to be looked at when you are presenting the unprepared speaking. Right. So, grade 12s, after all of this said and done, the assessment is there. we have to understand why are we as a panel moderating your orals. Now remember, you are at school and you have your teacher and your moderator at school. They know you over the years, okay? They're going to be able to give us a particular assessment of your speech. Thereafter, what happens, like your NSC examinations, is the external bodies then assess to see whether you've understood the teaching that has happened over your time at school. All right? That's the written part of the exams. The same token, we have the external panel that sits down and then asks you to present your orals that you've done over the year. And those orals will represent as well your ideas that you hold, your thought pattern, your planning pattern about life, the skills that you have in being able to take relevant information from your body of knowledge and present that to us. All right? So that is what we are doing here. We are saying, yes, ma'am or sir has assessed you with the moderator at school. Now we want to see, have they also seen what we are seeing while you are presenting? All right. So we want to ensure that the entire process has been done fairly. It has given you a valid or a reliable mark for the assessment. So in other words, remember, you also at school level have the opportunity to say to ma'am, listen, ma'am, can we just discuss why I was given this mark? And then when you have an understanding of why you got that mark and maybe you failed the task, there is a possibility, and again, it's all based on circulars, memos, all those relevant documents at school level, and the teacher and the HOD to then say, we're going to be giving the opportunity to the learner to present. Now, let's say you also were not at school for a period of time because you were sick, then we'd look at also opportunities given to you to present. But please, grade 12s, we are saying to you there's a time frame to complete your assessments. If you are not adhering to those time frames because you find other things more important than your schoolwork, then you need to understand that there will be consequences for that. And therefore, you don't want to be on the receiving end of where those consequences are that you are not resulted. So if ma'am says to you, Vash, you had doing your prepared speech on the 15th of May, for example, then Vash has to ensure that she's ready for that speech on the 15th of May, non-negotiable. And remember, in your school, you're not the only student. There are more students in the classroom that needs to be recessed, and we're giving you that slot to present to the best of your ability, and you need to do justice in that situation. All right. So we're checking, was the assessment done in a reliable fashion? Was the mark valid? All of those things. Okay. So yes, you may have had a bad day when you're presenting, but it doesn't mean you will have a bad day on the second or the third day as well if you have to present. All right. So learn from the mistake and move forward to make sure the next effort is not as bad as the first one. So we also want to see in terms of your language competency, have you progressed over the year where you've started off with basic knowledge and you've enhanced those the knowledge base. You've added in more content that makes you more appreciative of what you've learned. You've looked at aspects where you can speak about when they're asking you questions, during the assessment. Bring in, maybe you read a good book that you want to bring a lesson in that's relevant to the topic you're speaking about. All of those things can come in with the assessment, and we can then gauge whether you are appropriately ready for the next phase of life. Then we want to see, are you able to listen to what the instructions are? And you can then employ that instructions and deliver a good speech. Can you speak appropriately? Can you read appropriately? Can you view content that you've seen over the years in an appropriate manner? And then can you write down information in an appropriate or in a confident manner and present that? All right. So that is why the panels will ask or will come and interview the candidates at school. We want to see also, have you been able to employ language as a good a way of relating your real life experiences by taking note of people around you, and can you deliver content that's appropriate to the time that you're in or in the space that you're in at that particular time. Right. Then can you express your viewpoint? Can you substantiate your viewpoint with relevant stats, relevant evidence? Okay. Are you an independent thinker? Are you an analytical thinker? Can you break down information and make more sense of it? Those are why we are looking at the unprepared speech. Can you also use language and your imagination to represent or or explore experiences that you've had throughout your life? All right. So that's what we are using the unprepared speaking for. So, what is your way forward as a grade 12 learner? Let's say, for example, you have been given the speech or the unprepared speech, and you want to know now, where are we going with this? Essentially, we want to make sure that when you're presenting, you're able to stand up straight, you keep your legs flat on the ground, and stand still. Don't move back and forth all the time. It's not nice, okay? That is one thing. Please always start only when the audience is silent. You can't be talking over people voices while you are presenting, right? Be formal in your approach because it is a formal assessment, okay? You don't want to now go and present in an informal manner and you don't get your relevant information across. So be formal. Speak with clarity. Make sure that the words or the letters you are pronouncing are clear to the audience. Always ensure that you project your voice well. All right. Don't, if you're fumbling with statements you are making, for example, take a little pause break and or pause or a break and then come back to the content that you're covering. Please pause at the relevant places. Note that you have a particular tone you want to use and a certain way in which you're going to pace out your presentation as well. Right. Use appropriate hand gestures where needed and always remain having eye contact with your audience because that is where you get to share your space with them. Right? If you've used the audio visual, remember, become dynamic in your approach and make sure they are obviously coming together appropriately when you are presenting. And then grade 12s, that's basically how you're going to present your speeches over the year or over the next month, and make sure you do justice to that, please. Okay? Don't find yourself failing this opportunity and then jeopardizing your entire grade 12 year. So, what's going to happen next is that this is part of your just-in-time lessons, and we are then going to have lessons throughout this term as well, grade 12s, where we're going to help you also prepare for your exams coming forward pretty soon, and we're going to start with that also pretty soon over the next few weeks. So remember the time that we're going to be dealing with. It's always going to be between 2:30 and 4 on a Monday, where we would be giving you this broadcast. So please make time for that and ensure that you do justice to it. All right. I want to thank you so much, grade 12, for joining me today in this lesson on orals. I will be back pretty soon again in the next few weeks to present another lesson for you in English home language. But up until that point, please take care of yourself. Make sure you have a good study program already being in place to work with, and that you master the content that ma'am or sir is teaching you for your NSC exam this year, as well as your prelims, more importantly, your June exam coming up as well. So until that time, please take care and catch you pretty soon. My name is Vash Suchit, and this is the English Home Lessons brought to you by Pakama, as well as the Gauteng Department of Education in collaboration with the Cyborner Discovery Center.